Now gives me great pleasure to introduce Chris Jones, and I've also known Chris for a number of years. He describes himself as a 60-year-old carbon farmer, ecologist and beaver champion, and he's worked in forestry, as a policeman, as a drilling fluids engineer, as a community energy organizer, and as an army reservist. He says nature has the answers to climate, system thinking is vital, and hopes it's not too late. And if you've never been to Chris's place, you really should visit. We used to have, about the time of peak oil and Rob Hopkins and transition and stuff, we had a little group called Groundswell, and we used to meet at Chris's place. And there was always something new there. So there might be a straw bale building, or he had a lady from Uganda visiting, and she built a keyhole garden and a clay oven. There was always something new to look at. And also he's got an immense apple press there. I remember going there on Apple Day. Don't know, I'll stop talking now and I'll hand you over to Chris Jones, who's the title of whose talk is Agroforestry and Riparian Buffers. So thank you, Chris.
I'm not going to show any slides. I haven't got any worth showing. But anyway, I'm just going to gabble on. First of all, this is probably the most interesting bit of all, just a bit about me. Okay, I am a farmer for my sins. I'm also the co-owner of Woodland Valley Farm, which is 170 acres of grade 3 land, very typical for Cornwall. It includes 16 acres of woodland and 16 acres of new wood pasture. And which we hope to do more of this winter. A highly diversified farm business. I am the proud owner of a part-used BSc forestry degree from Bangor, and I'm partner in the Cornwall Beaver project and a director of Beaver Trust. Now, what's the context here? The context is that we are in an emergency. There is no question about that, because although climate change seems like a very slow burn, we've already seen in our own lifetimes a considerable change, and this is just going to accelerate. And alongside this, we've got the ecological crisis too. Now, nature's way of facing crises like these, or emergencies like these, is to adapt, and this applies to us. Creatures or species that fail to adapt tend to go extinct quite quickly, and currently, if we can't see ways to adapt, we are going to go the same way, and I just don't see any alternative to that. However, we should also remember, with the rewilding and so on, which is seen as such a great hope, we still have to eat. And we still have to slash emissions. And I mean slash emissions. We can't just be messing around with little bits here and there. We have to absolutely nail emissions, because if we don't, we will not achieve the changes we need to, the adaptation we need to survive what's coming and to blunt the impact of that. So we don't just have to slash emissions, we have to sequester carbon like we mean it. And I've been involved in actively farming our own farm here for carbon sequestration for the last 12 years or so. And there have been some remarkable results, or I believe remarkable results, that could be translated to very, very large areas of this country. So, what are our opportunities for carbon sequestration on farm? Woodland, it's a no-brainer. Trees are made of carbon. Wetland, another no-brainer. I suspect that wetland, which has declined by about 90% in this country over the last few hundred years, is a really big missing element in this that we should revisit. The next one, perennial pasture. I get very dismayed by the general slating of livestock farming. If we apply grass only regimes, perennial pasture has a dramatic ability to absorb carbon. And I can tell you that on our property, we have doubled our soil organic matter in the last 10 years. It wasn't too bad to start with, but now we're up 9 to 10% across the farm, which is remarkable. And that isn't just an increase in soil organic matter percentage, it's also gradually an increase in the amount of soil too. And anyone who says we've got too much topsoil is a bloody fool. The next way, and this is what I'm going to be talking more about, is perennial pasture with trees in it, wood pasture. And then finally, arable land with trees in it. There's no reason on this earth why we cannot have arable land with a lot of trees in it. There's a gentleman called Stephen Briggs who has produced 600 acres of agroforestry on his arable farm in Cambridgeshire, with rows separated by 22 meters, rows of apple trees separated by 22 meters of farmland, and the next row of trees. And he's managed to produce not only some great effects with his soils, but he's also got a second crop on his farm, which is really important. It's like beginning to apply the principles of permaculture on a very, very grand scale indeed, with stacking enterprises. So what about woodlands in Britain and indeed in Cornwall as a microcosm of Britain? You know, since long before the Romans came, woodland was in decline here in terms of area. And it reached its absolute nadir in the early 20th century, around about the start of the First World War. We were down to something like 5% or so of the whole woodland under closed canopy forest. And then following the First World War, the Forestry Commission was established, and they were there to build essentially a strategic reserve of timber. And that was quite successful up to a point. And we now have, through a variety of means, about 10% cover in the UK, in England, a bit more across the whole of the UK. But I still believe Cornwall is below average. Are we 7 or 8% closed canopy woodland? But we face a lot of competing land use objectives. And it was not long ago, in my lifetime, farmers were still being paid to convert woodland into farmland. It'd be hard to do that today, but you know, this is something which we're still suffering the effects of. But also lots of competing woodland objectives. If we're planting trees, what are they for? Why are we planting them? And I would also apply the question, do we really need more closed canopy woodland? And if we think we need more closed canopy woodland, why do we need more closed canopy woodland? What is it going to do to us, do for us, which is so imperative that we actually need it? I would posit that an alternative to that would be not a lot more closed canopy woodland, but a very great deal more trees right across all our farmland, because we can grow trees on farms which are completely compatible with current mechanized farming techniques and provide considerable benefits to that farmland and those enterprises. So I pose a question then, why should we bugger up a perfectly good farm by planting trees on it? Or, paraphrase that is, what did trees ever do for us? And I think from the farm point of view, once you've got beyond that, oh my God, it's a tree in my field, we should think about things like this. What do they actually do for us? And they do a hell of a lot. From my point of view as a livestock farmer, and with our drier, hotter, sunnier summers that we seem to be getting, shade is incredibly important. We noticed in the summer of 2018, when we had the really, really hot days, the milk production went down by about 25% because the animals were getting stressed by having to sit out in the middle of a bare field. And so that's been a big driver for us starting this tree planting. But by the same token, we have cold, wet, windy winters as well, and trees provide shelter. Trees can provide really excellent fodder and critically very well mineralized fodder, because they have such deep roots which are able to reach down and bring up all sorts of things that the normal grass crops and so on can't. But also thinking about this theme of woody products, this theme of stacking enterprises, the trees can provide us with fruit and nuts. They can provide us with all sorts of woody products. And I'm thinking things like wood chip, for example, for bedding or mulching. If you grow the right sort of trees for long enough, timber. I would say for a farmer, being able to produce your own good quality fencing material, it would be pretty important. But we still need a huge amount of construction timber in this country, and we could be doing this in open fields without any problem at all. Fuel. Sequestration. This, in our case, we're already sequestering a hell of a lot, and to me, adding the trees into the equation, it enables us to up the ante on that, both below ground and also in terms of the actual wood entrained in the timber itself, if we're going to use that for long-term uses like construction or furniture or anything like that. So some really good sequestration effects there. And ecologically, it's giving us structural diversity, which is good for a whole host of things. And it's giving us edge effect, a lot of edge effect. You know, our the patch of ground that we've done our wood pasture on has now got 9 rows of trees running across it. So it's like having 9 hedgerows going across the field. And we all know that at edge effect, a lot of our processes are accelerated. A lot of our ecological processes accelerated. And it gives more stuff and more things to hang out in a more 3-dimensional kind of world. Okay, so this session has been called The Right Tree in the Right Place. Now, I would pose the question, is that question a daft one? I would submit that in virtually any place, you could have, I don't know, maybe 20 different trees would be able to cope with the conditions there. They won't all necessarily do the same things for you, but they would all thrive there quite well. So does that mean any one of those might be the wrong tree? And what's the right place for a tree? Well, I would submit pretty much across the whole of our land is the right place for a tree, as long as not all of it. I really think that in our current situation, the idea that we're going to fix it just by planting thousands of acres of woodland is bloody daft. We still have to eat, and we can have our cake and eat it in this case, because we can have trees everywhere. So if it were me, I would be really searching hard for a way to incentivize farmers to actually start engaging in tree planting. And I would incentivize that with our new elm system coming out and make that really, really systemic. That is to say, rather than try and do a bit of everything like it's trying to do now, rather than trying being a shitter version of countryside stewardship, why don't we just pay farmers to sequester carbon? If farmers are paid to sequester carbon and what's more taxed for emitting carbon, you'll see a wholesale change in the way that farming takes place, because farmers, surprise, surprise, are not completely stupid. They might be short-sighted, but not completely stupid. And when they see the way that things are going financially, they will want to take that up, believe me. Until now, we've been paid just for being lucky enough to own land, essentially. And clearly that has to stop. Anyway, just coming back to the trees and right trees in right places, however silly a concept that is. We just need to ask ourselves, why do we want to plant the trees in the first place? What do we want them to achieve? We should ask ourselves, what will the planting hurt? Or what will that particular tree species hurt? Or what will benefit from it and how? And I think that is probably all I need to say, really, about agroforestry, apart from the fact that we just really, really, really need a lot more of it. As I say, I cannot see any way of actually persuading farmers to be doing this en masse until there is no other way of going forward. And the best way to do that is by paying the buggers and paying them well for carbon. Now, I did want to talk a little bit about riparian buffers, because that's something very dear to my heart with the Beaver project here. There's been stuff in the press just today, I think, about how none of our rivers, none of our freshwater water bodies or waterways in this country are in good ecological health. And there are two basic reasons for that, I think. One is that we farm right up to our riverbanks in so many cases. And the other reason is that we do not have widespread beavers anymore. And it would be my contention that a river cannot be in good ecological health without the presence of that game-changing animal. I won't say any more about that particularly now, because I'm talking about trees. But you know, a river doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a landscape, and most streams will affect, if we are living in an unconstrained kind of way, most rivers will affect the land either side of them. And I would propose that along with our payments for carbon sequestration, I think we should also be seeking to pay through ELMS for a 20-meter buffer on the bank of every watercourse. And for me, I would make that compulsory. I think there should be no choice whatever about that. Our water is in a shocking state because of the way we treat it through agriculture, mostly through agriculture, but also through around sort of domestic sewage and so on as well. So if we have a 20-meter buffer, and if we don't cultivate in there, or don't allow any cultivation in there, and don't allow any chemical or fertilizer applications, we will immediately see natural processes begin to take over there again. It will reduce and capture silting and chemical runoff from the rest of our farmland. It will slow runoff to help with flood risk management. And it really does provide the pluperfect nature recovery network. Can you imagine Cornwall if every stream had a 40-meter strip running through and along it everywhere through the county? It would be absolutely extraordinary. It would accommodate beaver expansion. It would accommodate the natural flow of the river. And European experience tells us where we do have these barriers, that 90% of beaver farmer conflict is removed when that buffer is applied. It's incredibly important. But back to the trees thing, it would be really useful if we actually planted trees or let trees establish in those buffers too. They will establish over time, but it could take a long time. And I would submit that if we do plant, we need to be planting trees which are well adapted to wet or wettish conditions. And foremost amongst those, willow, aspen, and other poplars, plus oaks, plus thorns. So we not only can produce a very beaver-friendly habitat, we can also produce a habitat which is very, very useful to a whole host of other species. So just in conclusion, I just want to say that agroforestry has to be a really major part. The idea of planting 8,000 hectares of trees in the county is frankly a nonsense. We can't do that. We haven't got the land available. We can't all be like NEP. We can't all just decide that we're going to give up farming and let things go wild. That isn't going to happen. But we can all farm a hell of a sight better in a way which is much, much more wildlife friendly, which will go from being very carbon emitting to carbon sequestering. And we can do that really tomorrow, as long as the incentives are there. I think that's just what I want to say now, Lindsay, and I hope I've picked up some time for you in the timetable. I'm very happy to answer questions. Thanks very much.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Would you be okay to take one question?
Yes.
Okay, so what is the one single thing you have done that has increased carbon sequestration the most?
Stop ploughing.
Ah, right. Did you want to elaborate on that, or should
Okay.
we?
Okay. Well, soil under a growing plant cover sequesters carbon. It can't do otherwise. If you kill that green cover and then turn the soil over, soil carbon or soil organic matter will begin to be oxidized. The rates of that depend a bit on the soil type. You know, sandy soils will lose their soil organic matter really, really quickly under cultivation. Our sort of more clay-based soils around Cornwall, by and large, hold on to it better. But even so, stopping ploughing here has had a massive difference. And I just think, you know, we're looking now for the way to we can increase that and increase the general ecological health, if you like, of our land. And I believe that planting trees across it is it. I would say I wouldn't plant trees right across all the fields, because we've got some land which is still hosting skylarks, and those fields, if we turn that into a three-dimensional structure, I think we'll lose skylarks very quickly. So the very highest fields we've got, I think I will not plant trees on, but most of the rest of them, yeah.
Right. Thank you very much. I have to say that I think your farm is an exemplar. And
but it's because I'm daft enough to do things.
Yeah,
and in some ways it is daft. I mean, I've got neighbours who say yes, that they'd do something different if what they're doing now becomes completely unprofitable.
Mm.
So I'm saying tax them for carbon emitting, and pay them for carbon sequestrating.
Yes,
and they'll be coming to you and saying, Chris, how did you do that?
Mm.
And that's where we need to be. Is that kind of impulsion for farmers to change the way they work.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.